So thank you for choosing Great Hearts Arlington. As you know, we're a public nonprofit charter school. We abide by all Texas state guidelines for public schools and offer the same level of academic support and special services as your local ISD. Please do not hesitate to reach out to our administrative team with any questions or concerns regarding your students. We are here to support you and partner with your family. And with that, I will share my screen and hand it over to Mr. Dunnett.
Excellent. Thank you, Mrs. Garthune. So I appreciate everyone being on the call today. I know maybe this is not the best time, so what we're doing, and like Mrs. Garthune shared, we want to record so that we work this time frame for them. But this is going to be both very general with respect to Great Hearts' curricula, but also specific to what those 4th and 5th graders are doing. What does a day in the life of a 4th and 5th grader with Great Hearts look like? And I know that a lot of parents came in with maybe a bit of trepidation thinking about this is a very intentional work, and it's kind of scaffolded and cyclical starting in kindergarten. So with students coming in brand new, how do we support them? Well, my first answer is we do this a lot. We welcome new students all the time and all the time. So this is something that we've really developed really well over these last couple of years, but also thinking everyone's going to be new. All the 4th graders, all the 5th graders. Of course, we're going to have a couple transfer students from some other Great Heart campuses, but the vast majority are very new to this classical conversation. Is the content, the material, the skills that we hope that they acquire are not extraordinarily unique. We are a fully public school. We have to adhere to the Texas Education Knowledge Standards, and we have to take the STAR test. But those things are only a byproduct of this greater philosophical idea that we're helping students be inculcated in. So have an understanding that we have support systems. We have math and reading intervention. We do free tutoring. Of course, we have 504 and special education coordinators on our campus to say, yeah, we're going to have a vast array of academic differentiation that we hope to support our students in, especially over this first year, to kind of get them acclimated into this newest culture. So that aside, let's get into what these 4th and 5th graders are learning. So I have this PowerPoint up, and the 4th and 5th graders are coming to the end of this grammar stage, and that just means an acquisition of specific skills. So look at to do that. One of the fundamental pieces in language arts is our phonics program. It's called Spalding, and you might be new to phonics as well, and we don't follow a whole language lesson system or basal readers. We go very back to the beginning, back to this acquisition of phonemic awareness and initial phonogram sounds and decoding and encoding. And at the beginning, even in 4th and 5th grade, we go very, very basic. So students who might never have gone through a phonics program, or even students who have gone through a phonics program, this one's a little bit different. It's very structured and very rigorous, but scaffolded in a way that really supports students' learning. You might be thinking about cursive handwriting too. Well, all of our scholars, kindergarten through 6th grade, will be starting with manuscript handwriting. We'll be starting with single letter phonograms. Now, of course, those older students very quickly transition into what is developmentally appropriate as they are 9, 10, 11 years old. So very quickly after we've coached them in this initial habit formation of phonemic awareness, they get to that developmental stage of like, okay, multi-letter phonograms, okay, adding cursive on, okay, starting to give them the responsibility and autonomy to do those things in very specific ways. So I want to kind of, the next slide is a picture of some of the things that we use in all of our grade levels. So from the very beginning and every day, students practice their phonograms. So teachers have these flashcards and their initial phonograms, single letter phonograms and multi-letter phonograms. And the class as a whole goes through the phonograms and they learn them. They learn how to put words together based on their sounds and take them apart and work through that process. Each of our scholars also has this anchor notebook that they work through. Now, the 4th and 5th graders, they have a blue notebook. The younger students have a pink notebook. but they write their spelling words in there. And we don't really call them spelling words, and we don't really have spelling quizzes because it's not for memorization. It's not sight word acquisition. It's working them through, how do I put words together based on the sounds that I know, and teaching the students that, yeah, the English language can look like a hodgepodge of a lot of different languages coming together, but it is, again, this idea of ordered and knowable. There are 72 phonograms that we use for the most part. There are 29 rules that they work through. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see how those students start at the very beginning. We have this list, their spelling list. It's called the Ayers list. And it starts with the most basic words that are commonly used in speech. So the first word, interestingly enough, is me. The most common word used in speech is me. So even the 4th and 5th graders, they'll start here with manuscript. They'll say, my base word is me. My syllables are me. My sounds are e, and they'll write that down. They're taking a lot of kids. This notebook is kind of like a product for the end of the year to see how much they've grown. And when letters don't say what they normally say, there's a marking and rule to go along with it. So even in that first word, me, we underline the letter E because usually it says E, but in this situation it says E. And there's a rule that says vowels may say their name at the end of a syllable. So this is kind of a little taste of how we scaffold our students through all the jobs of silent final E, rule 17, we double an L, an F, or an S, and walking students, and this sounds like a lot, but we very, very slowly scaffold them through this process. Maybe we spend an entire day during that lesson learning new rules and new markings. Now, once they've been steeped in that, they can now get to harder words that might be more developmentally appropriate for 4th and 5th graders, and they extend from there. But they need to have the basics and the foundation first. And every brand new school goes through this process. The kindergartners do me, do, and go, and the 6th graders do me, do, and go. Now the kindergartners will just kind of progress on a normal level, where 5th and 6th graders will jump to in the Ayers list where it's more appropriate. So that's one of our cornerstones of our phonics program that supports language arts development. So staying in that thread, in the language arts thread, we'll continue to literature, because that's a big piece of classical education too. And I've just thrown up the books here, classics to keep for both 4th and 5th grade. So 4th grade on the left, 5th grade on the right. And again, these are books that you might have seen, you might have read, you might not have read. And we are hoping to steep students in great literature that has stood the test of time, that will make them more than what they currently are, kind of transcend them out of themselves to seeing virtue and morals and right thinking from good examples. So you might also be thinking, these books are kind of hard, even for 4th and 5th graders. You're right. And we can't assume that students come in being able to read these books fluently. So what we do alongside our literature program is called reading groups or book clubs. So sometimes they're doing their classics to keep, which are these. They do as a class, as a literature study. They work through it together, but this is not necessarily for reading practice. So the reading practice is more scaffolded for where are students at in that reading development. So they might be grouped homogeneously with their grade level peers and saying, oh, we're doing a book club on this other book. Maybe it's a little bit more appropriate for their level, either below or above, so that they're getting really significant daily practice in reading fluency and automaticity, but also being steeped in these common books for the grade level as a literature study. So if you have any questions specifically about that, just throw them in the chat and we'll get to those at the end. But I want to continue in this language arts thread, because it's big. We have phonics, we've got literature, but we also have grammar and writing. So I want to speak to the 4th and 5th graders in their grammar and writing program. As they develop through kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, and they're developing these very intentional skills in the formation of what does beautiful language look like, we now want to start to get to the point where they can do that independently. So if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of show you just the 2 programs that we use both for grammar and writing. So for grammar, we have well-ordered language, and this is a classical approach to putting good forms in front of the students and kind of dissecting the language. So we would take beautiful sentences from their literature, from passages, and say, let's look at why these words do what they do. So parts of speech, nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, phrases, predicates, coordinated conjunctions, all of those things, but only with respect to how are they doing the thing within language. So rather than definition, trying to put our own thoughts into writing, we kind of take it out of writing. We say, this is a beautifully constructed sentence. Why? Why do these words convey meaning, and how do they do so? What's the intentionality of the author putting these things in front? Similarly, for our writing program, IEW, the Institute for Excellence in Writing, it is a program that develops very, very specific skills in doing the most effective things in writing. So when they're young students, they're just being steeped in beautiful writing. They're not doing any creative writing on their own. They're not doing any journal prompts that forms bad habits. They're just doing copy work and dictation, good to 4th and 5th, in middle school and high school. They're kind of taking those habits and starting to dissect them and put them into their own writing in very scaffolded, structured ways, because we want to get them to the point where in high school that they can do that. They can write independently. They can take pieces and habits of what they know and start to do that. But even in 4th and 5th grade, they're not necessarily ready to do that. So this is very structured to say, how do I look at writing, and how do I start to produce very similar writing to what is good and what is beautiful? So let's continue from there. I think what I have next is talking about math. Yes, and if you've heard me talk about the Singapore math approach, that's the CPA approach, concrete, pictorial, abstract, where we start very basic with the students in this number sense idea that things are real. Again, even in 4th grade, going very back to the basics of saying, yeah, you probably learned multiplication and division. You've probably gone into fractions and decimals and percents. But do you have a real world understanding of how that communicates about reality? Probably not. They've probably just memorized a lot of steps and definitions and practiced it over and over and over. We want to go back to say, let's look at something concrete and real in reality so that you can form this idea in your mind that that thing is something real, rather than just something abstract or conceptual. And then going to the pictorial to say, like, yeah, now you can hold it in your mind. You can draw a picture or do a bar model or a graph. You don't need to hold something physical, but you know that it represents something physical. And then and only then going to the algorithm, saying, yeah, with steps, throwing and regrouping. That's the most beautiful and effective and efficient way to solve mathematical processes. But if we just jump to, here it is, memorize it, practice it 1,000 times, there's no idea of why this thing does the thing that it does. Why is it important? How does it communicate about reality? So us going very cyclical through all of our programs from kindergarten through 5th grade, going back to those same concepts, but developing them a little bit more conceptually and a little bit more pragmatically, to this point where I have all of these skills and I know why they're important. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you one of the things that we do that is a little bit different in 4th and 5th grade, and it's called bar modeling. So on the left, you see some manipulatives. We use real stuff, even in 4th and 5th grade, like they'll do stuff with their hands so that they have the idea of reality. But then the pictorial method is this bar model. So if you see, and I'm not going to go through this problem, but you could just turn it into a long division problem if you have that conceptual understanding and do your steps to solve. But a student would never be able to communicate really why those things are doing what they're doing. So if we can put it in a picture, if we say parts and wholes, like I have 3 times of something else that represents 24, but if it's 3 times something else, that means there's 3 equal groups inside of it. So this other person has one of those 3 equal groups. Well, then you can start to chop it up. You could use addition. You could use subtraction. You could use multiplication and division. You could show it in different ways. So allowing students to have these abilities to do it in different ways, because students think differently. They're all unique and they're all individual. And some ways of looking at information might be very effective for other students, and other students might be like, I just don't get it. okay, let's draw a picture. Let's do something real. They're like, wow. And then we make the transition to saying like, yeah, if you see it now, can we skip to now doing that mental process on your own? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but that's okay. It's not about we that, but only in the position that is communicating about something real. Okay, enough on that. And if you have particular questions, put them in the chat. So let's continue with our history and our science program. So they're both out of our core knowledge program, which was developed by Dr. Ish, which is this content-rich information that every person, every Westerner, every person in American society, which is us, all of our students, should know, from certain poetry and nursery rhymes to literature, but also specific historical figures and history facts. We don't study social studies, we study history. And we study all religions and all cultures. Now, of course, we are unapologetic about because we are as Americans, but also giving students this perspective of the Western tradition validates differences, validates other people's opinions and diversity and inclusion, even from ancient Greece and Rome. So doing all of those things hand in hand are really important. So science, very similar, this body of knowledge that within scientific inquiry that we're bringing students toward. However, we supplement our science. And if you go to the next page, you'll see our FOSS program. Now, FOSS is not our curriculum. Core knowledge is our curriculum. But FOSS allows students to observe the real things more in the class. So FOSS provides us with experimentation kits and stuff that go along with our science units so students can manipulate it in the real world, because they need to do direct observation. We can't just talk about it. We can't just see it in a book or read it or look at a picture. They need to manipulate it in reality. They need to see it. And that's the most important part, the active participation of the students doing the thing that we're trying to draw them toward. So again, if you have more questions about unit specific, we can get into that. But I want to continue with talking about our specials programs. So each day, students will have 2 40-minute specials, is what we call them. Maybe on Monday, they have PE and art, and on Tuesday, they have foreign language and music. Now, the reason I put up 2 foreign languages in here is that as we go from 4th and 5th grade, kind of finishing up our Spanish curriculum, our immersive Spanish curriculum, once they transition into 6th grade, they're going to start learning Latin. And you 5th graders and 4th graders won't have to worry about that until 6th grade. But again, this idea of students probably haven't learned Latin, and Latin is really good for them. And not just because it's hard. The difficulty is really good for them as well, but learning something new and a perspective outside of themselves that, yes, is utilitarian, can help them acquire language. It's really good. And even speaking with our Spanish immersion program, there's going to be students coming into 4th and 5th grade who have never done Spanish, which is okay, or people coming from Hispanic communities who speak fluent Spanish. Now, this program is very rich in cultural diversity that allows students from either end of the spectrum to dialogue with one another and think about culture in a different way outside of the American Western tradition that allows all of our students to be successful. So don't be too worried about kind of jumping in the middle of that program, because we know that. We know it's new and we know it's different, and supporting students in that as well. So art and music are very about showing students the transcendently beautiful things. So representations in classical art and classical music, because we're drawing students outside of themselves, and we want them to develop specific skills and habits in looking at those things and dealing with those things in very particular ways before launching them into the creative side. So in music, they study theory and they study classical musicians and composers and the historical relevance. Similarly in art, in different media and different skill acquisition, line, form, texture, value. What they're doing is a normal art, but not the creative portion. Because again, they're not ready to take what's within themselves and put it out, because we have yet to put the best things in. So doing a lot of inculcating them in the best stuff before they're ready to start to create. Now, physical education is very unique because it's not just about developing particular skills in football or baseball. Yeah, fine motor and gross motor skills are really important, but this idea that the physicality of us as human beings is important because our bodies are beautiful. They're made to move in certain ways, and kind of teaching students that we have to take care of our bodies and we have to move in particular intentional ways to create this idea of the physical nature of us as human beings in reality is really important. But yeah, they learn different skills and teamwork and camaraderie and how to lose and how to win in appropriate ways. And they do baseball and basketball, even within the PE program. So again, if you have particular questions, throw them in the chat. I think do I have one more slide? Oh, I've got some schedules, I think. I wanted to walk through some schedules for the 4th and 5th graders. So this is a 4th grade schedule. So I'm going to walk through 4th grade and tell you how 5th grade is slightly different. So students start coming to school at 7:15 a.m. and they have half an hour window for parents to drop them off, where the students are coming in, they're getting acclimated in the classroom, they're organizing their things, maybe they have a little bit of bell work. And then we start the day. We start with the pledge to the American and the Texas flag. We take attendance. It's during that time that if your student would want hot lunch from the school, during the attendance time, we sign them up, and we can talk a little bit more about that at the end. But we provide you a month in advance what the menus are, and you put money onto your account, and students have little ID numbers. And if they choose to have school lunch, it's just deducted from your account. So we can talk more particulars there. But then we go right into our phonics program, and it's pretty intensive. We go through that oral phonogram review, written phonogram review. Then they get out their blue notebooks and they start working through that process. And again, we hope to eventually be 10 words every day, getting to this idea of reviewing on Thursday and Friday. We have a spelling quiz, but it's never for memorization. It's all about developing these skills toward reading acquisition and speaking acquisition. So that's really intensive in the morning, and that's a good time for the students to be fresh and go into that. Now, on a red day, they would go to music class, and on a blue day, they'd go to PE. That's just what we call rotating back and forth, because they have 2 each day. Then they go into their math program. They might do some fact fluency and then really get into an anchor task where they're working through a real life situation and talking through that CPA approach, whether it be fractions or decimals or percentages. Then they would go to recess. Now we're looking to adjust it slightly to have even the older students have 2 break times. So this is a schedule from our Fort Worth campus, and our Irving campus does it slightly different. So we're still working through our schedule about what does that look like at our new campus, having the auditorium and the multi-purpose room and some play space outside. So dependent on that structure, we might have 2 recesses, 2 shorter recesses for the older students. Then the students go to lunch. They have lunchtime with their classmates, and that's the time where we would provide them with food, or they would go through the line to get school lunch, or they would bring a lunch from home. Either of those options is totally fine. Then they go to their literature time, where depending on the day, they'd either do their literature study with their classics to keep, or they go into their book clubs for reading fluency practice rather than a literature time. And then here, what they did at our Fort Worth campus is they do every other day writing and grammar. Some classes do writing and grammar every day with a little bit of shorter time. This grade level decided on one day we'll do writing, and the next day we'll do grammar, and they'll kind of go back and forth. But we do have poetry and vocabulary within our literature study as well. And then a little break for read aloud time, where students are not necessarily doing a literature study with this it's just a rich acquisition of books, just having some downtime to listen and absorb and not necessarily have to discuss it at length. Then next they go to either Spanish or art. Now Lyceum is a time of flex time for the students. Now every class gets a Lyceum, but it is really just flex time. Now if the student needs additional small group instruction in reading or small group instruction in math, we have reading interventionists and math interventionists and dyslexia specialists, or maybe they go to special education at that time, or maybe they go to ESL or OT or speech. This is the time where anybody could go to get what they need. Now, if students stay in the classroom, it's just enrichment activities. We don't want those students who are getting additional support to miss out on core instruction, whether it be from core math instruction or from music class. But this is a time where they all are getting what they're needing. And then there's less of a stigma about, I always get pulled out at this time. No, everyone's doing different things during Lyceum. So that space during the schedule is really intentional to help students to get what they need. And then this class, they do back and forth history and science days. Again, some do it all in the same day. Some classes do it unit by unit. We'll do a whole history unit, then we'll do a whole science unit. This class just decided to do every other day, we'll do history and science. And then at the end of the day, they get ready to go. They pack up their things, they get their homework, they get their planners. They're ready to transition back to home. And they have between 3:30 and 4 to get picked up. At 4, if a student needs to stay after school for our Athenaeum program to get more enrichment or to stay for tutoring, which we would provide, they can do that as well. And we would just communicate that to you or with our Athenaeum director. Now, the only difference with 5th grade is that they start to content specialize. So we're trying to create an intentionality behind what does 7th grade look like, and not just launching them out of the self-contained homeroom model to 7th grade, 6 55-minute periods and transitions. So in 5th grade, maybe they have a teacher that does science and math, and they have another teacher that does literature and history, and another that does grammar and writing. We scaffold that process of students now have tables instead of desks. They have lockers instead of cubbies in the classroom. They're not locked, they're cubbies in the hallway, but their teacher kind of helps them transition from class to class. So it starts to be a little bit more responsibility on the student, directed by the teacher, maybe a couple transitions just within their little pod, within their group, to also do that a little bit more in 6th grade to 7th grade where they're full middle schoolers. So the content is the same, but the structure of the day of maybe a little bit more movement between the teachers is slightly different. So that is enough information from me. I didn't get into too much of the particulars. We don't need to continue in the slide. I want to go now to kind of putting it on you guys as the parents. I want to be able to answer much more directly your specific questions. So as you put the questions in the chat, or as you took notes, I'm just going to have Mrs. Garthun kind of call some people out. If you want to raise your hand or make a note in the chat that you have a question, and then you can share that out with the group and we can address it from there. So let's transition to our question and answer time now.
Mr. Dunick, we only had a few questions that Ms. Tovar and I have been able to answer, but if you want to speak a little bit more about Singapore math, Ms. Palmer had a question. Ms. Palmer, did you want to come on and discuss that math question?
I was curious because you were speaking about how it's going to be more real world, which I appreciate a lot, by the way, from my own schooling back in the day. But I know with regular like Arlington ISD and things like that, you know, the kids are not only graded on what their answer is, but they're graded on if they even did the steps appropriately. And that's really, you know, driven into their head. Well, you didn't do the step appropriately, so you only get 1 out of 5 possible points or whatever may be.
Sure.
Are the students, I mean, I know they need to show, you know, kind of their work, like if they chose to do it with more of the visual aspect, or did they chose to do it with a long division, or, you know, kind of in that example you showed, are they going to be counted off for the process they used or using a specific process, or is it ultimately mainly about them coming to the correct answer?
So generally, I would say it's ultimately about coming to the correct answer, but the student needs to be able to communicate why they came to that answer. Now, in some situations, the question calls for draw a bar model to show your thought process. Some would say, you can draw a bar model, but I also want you to think about the long division algorithm. But we're trying to put a lot of things in front of them so that once they've seen the bar model, the place value structure, and there's all these different strategies of like putting numbers in circles and taking them apart and showing them in manipulatives. So they get to, okay, I've seen 6 or 7 strategies to be able to do that. We don't care how you come to that answer. If you can say, oh, I put the numbers together like this, or I thought about it as place values like this, or I drew a picture like this, excellent. Because we don't want to put someone into a box to say like, no, you only have to do it this way. No, you could think about it in a number of different ways. Now, up until that point, we will challenge them to think about it in different ways, because we don't want a student to say like, okay, that way works for me, and I'm going to stay there and I'm not going to think about the other strategies. No, we want you to have the ability to do all of them, and then have the choice to see the one that is most effective for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Good question. Yeah.
Janik, Ms. Woodside was asking a question about the reading groups and how they're structured. Ms. Woodside, did you want to elaborate on that?
No, Mr. Dunning had mentioned a little bit briefly that there was a breakout into reading groups, but just kind of touched on it. I was just wanting a little bit more detail. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. So as we get into the school year and we kind of learn more about our students, about their strengths and about their relative weaknesses, we want to meet them at the appropriate level. And for reading, that's pretty specific about not necessarily their literature study. I don't know where the red fern grows. That's pretty pointed with respect to student development. So we want to give them the opportunity to be with groups of similar strength peers to work on the things that they need to work on. So when they're not doing their literature study, maybe they're in a group with 4 or 5 other students and they're reading another really beautiful text. It's not their classics to keep, but it's, you know, a more lengthy chapter book that they're working through with other grade level peers to develop reading fluency and reading practice that's much more on their level. So within the classroom, they get with their 4 or 5 other classmates, and the teacher would be kind of coaching their group work, where on one day they're just reading the chapter together. Maybe on the next day they start to discuss it and they have different roles, where someone's kind of the note taker and someone's the leader to moderate the discussion. They rotate roles, of course, but it's just with their grade level peers practicing their reading at a more developmentally appropriate level for them in that small group setting. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was just curious how you would determine the groups then. Is there a test given, or just kind of curious about that part? Thank you.
So good question. So we do MAP testing. And if you've seen measures of academic progress, it's a computer-based developmental test that gives us some objective data for the student. It's not perfect, and we know it's not perfect, and it's not for a grade. It's only to internally communicate, like, hey, what are the strengths and relative weaknesses of this particular class or this grade level, to start to give them some more specific instruction. Now, alongside that, because that's only one particular test, we also use this program called ImClass. And it came out of the DIBBLES program, if you've heard about DIBBLES, but it's just on reading fluency. So students read a passage at their level. Was it hard? Was it not hard? They do a little retell and comprehension of vocabulary, do a little bit of depth in it. It's very short that the students do 3 times a year just to track their progress. So that the ImClass plus the MAP testing, plus, of course, anecdotal evidence from the classroom about where a student's needs are at. That's how we kind of try to structure our groups on these kids are at this level, but always consistently monitoring them on, is this the right stuff? Are we doing the right thing for these students? But those are some objective measures that we use to internally communicate their level or their progress. Good question.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dr. Dunick, along these lines, Laura Avila asked, are the reading groups where comprehension skills are taught?
Good question. No. So the comprehension skills are taught in our literature studies. So that is a very structured, in-depth conversation as an entire class that they're working through together. The students aren't necessarily required to read it independently. We might encourage them to if they're able to, but that structure for the literature time is about comprehension, context, plot development, vocabulary, setting, all of those wonderful literature things that we do. And the reading groups time is really just for group work and reading fluency and practice. Good question. So the majority of the time of the literature development would be with their classics to keep, Robin Hood, Where the Red Fern Grows, all of those wonderful texts.
All right, next question. Miss Cassie asked if students will have an option to continue with Spanish or replace Latin with Spanish.
So not in the middle school. So we make that transition to a underutilized language with respect to the utilitarian nature of doing something hard and different, and for its grammar and writing sake as well, that all the students are going through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. Some campuses continue into 9th grade, but there's a lot of choice for the foreign language acquisition at the campus level once they get into the later high schools. So usually they have a choice between a foreign language, an ancient language, may it be continuing in Latin or Greek or Hebrew, or continuing with a modern language, may it be German or French or Spanish. When we get to that point, we'll probably ask our students what they want to do. We'll ask our teachers what the best curricular continuation is, because we do have slight autonomy within the foreign language program. But all the students K-5 will do Spanish, and at least 6th, 7th, and 8th grade will go through a course of Latin before continuing. Good question.
All right, Mr. Dunning, we've had a question about what to expect next year with COVID and masks and social distancing. Do you want to speak to that?
I would love to, and that is a fantastic question. So the first thought that comes to mind is talking about our hybrid instruction. And you might have heard that we're not going to do any hybrid instruction on any of our brick and mortar campuses. So we have Great Hearts Online, which then they have their own teachers and their own administration for students who need that accommodation. It's been very difficult, and as you might have known, for our teachers at the brick and mortar campus to do both, to have an online class and an in-person class at the same time. So this development of their own campus for Great Hearts Online really alleviates that. And it's better for the students too. They can get their own instructors, and they can do get their own campus, virtual campus. Now, for Precautions on the campus level, what we're currently doing at all of our campuses in Texas is the kindergarten through 3rd grade students have these desk shields, plexiglass desk shields on their desk, that when they're sitting at them, they can take their mask off. The older students, they don't have that because they have different desks and tables, and it was just more difficult to facilitate. And they're more, they're more mature. They can handle wearing masks the majority of the day. And all of our teachers wear masks the whole day. So the students can take them off at lunch and recess, but they keep them on the majority of the time. Now, we're still in discussion about what that looks like next year. And I have to honestly answer, I don't know yet. At the network level, we're discussing, should we make it optional? Should we stay the course with keeping our students safe in this particular area? Because we want to keep our teachers and our students safe. And I don't want to lose any community members who'd say, okay, we're lowering our restrictions and now I don't feel safe and now I'm not going to come to school. And we want as many kids who can come into this community as we can. So we're still wrestling with, should it be optional? Should we continue with it? Should we do the plexiglass or not? But that is a fantastic question, and it's still in discussion. So thank you.
All right, next question. Ms. Colopy, would you like to come on and ask your questions regarding the STAR test?
Sure. So I know that you guys do not teach to the STAR test. So your curriculum isn't revolving around what the test is looking for. However, I do know that in traditional, independent school districts, the TEA does require 5th graders to pass that STAR test in order to advance to 6th grade. And you guys do administer the STAR test. And so I'm just wondering if you have those same standards for the scholars.
We do. So the necessity of being a public school in Texas forces us to adhere to those standards that I wouldn't say we don't necessarily agree with. I think objective standards are great, but you're right, we don't teach to the test. But in this moral obligation to provide this type of schooling to anyone free of charge and no enrollment testing requirements, we do have to uphold teaching the TEKS and taking the STAR test. Now, there's kind of a scaffolded way to support students through that, because if they fail, they can take it again. Then we provide a summer program to help them just shore up skills, not teach to the test, but shore up those objective-based skills that they need. And then if they fail again, we can have a committee. So if a student really developmentally needs to go to the next grade and we're not going to hold to, you have to have this requirement because some students will not succeed in that area. If we've gone through that due diligence and then we have a committee before the next school year, meeting with the parents and the administration and deciding together, no, they should go to the next grade, we can do that. So we like to go through the process of, yeah, they're going to take it. Yeah, we're going to support them in taking it again in the summer and giving them some remediation if need be, but then forming a committee to say, if it is most appropriate to continue them on in this education, we're going to make that decision. And we're allowed to do that by the TEA. So great question.
Thank you.
Yes.
All right, we've got a few more questions. Mr. Dunn, could you lay out what we expect pickup and drop off to look like, what that procedure will look like?
So I will speak both physically and philosophically about that process. That's just who I am. I like to do that. But this idea of structure and order and safety are really important to us. So the physical part is, if you come up to Cooper and you see the school on your right, we have the parents have the opportunity to turn right onto campus off of Cooper. And then there's this big loop around the retention pond that then becomes very wide in front of the school. So we've discussed maybe 3, maybe 4 lanes of traffic from one corner of the building to the other corner of the building, that we have our own ops team, our own teachers and apprentice teachers all working together during that drop-off time to safely and orderly get the students out of the car and into the class. And of course, as quickly as possible. And it's important to note, and we'll have these conversations closer to the school year, it's going to be a learning curve. It's going to take a long time, those first couple weeks. So mitigating your frustration about this thing being really exciting and new, and understanding it's exciting and new. And students and parents and teachers going through this brand new thing, it's going to necessitate a little bit more time. Anyway, as they get dropped off in the front and they go through the vestibule, they go straight to their classes. And those first couple of weeks, we help them to their classes because they don't know where they're going. And then teachers kind of take that in a very orderly, structured format to start the day from there. Now, as parents continue through that line at the front of the building, there's a loop around on the other side of the building. So parents don't have to go behind the building. It loops back around in front of the building and you can turn right onto Cooper again. Now, again, this plan is still in development. We're 99% sure this is going to work out really well. We have to talk to the local state governance and say how many students are enrolled, how many cars does that mean? Is that enough space? But we're fairly certain that that's the process that is going to go. And so that process will be exactly the same in the afternoon. You'll turn right off Cooper, you'll go down the loop, and you'll be in line at the front of the building. Now, we have this internal automated system, and you have these placards on your car with your student's name. And that, as you pull through, a faculty member is putting your name onto the list, and that shows up on the projected screen in the student's classroom. And then they know, oh, my mom, my dad's here to pick me up. They orderly leave the classroom. Teachers direct them out to the walkway in front of the building, and then we put them in your car. And we found that to be very successful. So we're not all congregating together, or we're not all waiting outside, but the students are just in their classroom. They have started their homework, or they're reading a book, and then they are orderly coming out of the classroom to their car. So we'll have a whole parent orientation on what drop off and pickup looks like, but generally that's a good question.
All right, next question. Can you talk about how Great Hearts incorporates STEM into our science program, and if students are going to be able to study coding?
Great question. So this idea of a core classical canon of curricula and the structured and rigorous science and math program that does delve deep into a lot of these areas. Now, we would not call ourselves a STEM program. We do very, very little technology in the classroom. We want students to be very observing things that are real in real life and discussing those things within the hands-on experience. Now, we have also found in our extracurriculars and our clubs that students who are really interested in the particulars of robotics, coding, Lego, STEM programs, if there is a high desire in a certain population of students, and there's a teacher willing to facilitate those after-school opportunities, that's where we really lean into the specification of those diverse experiences, but keeping the core canon in the classroom very consistent for our scholars, and only branching out in outside of the classroom time for the students who are really interested in things like that. So that speaks to other clubs, and we've done running club and flag football club and cooking club, And again, those are based on what do students want to do, and do we have a lot of teacher-driven motivation to do those things outside of the school day. We don't like bringing in outside people. We love bringing in our parents. We love bringing in community members. But when we're really creating this intentional culture in school, but then bringing in other coaches or other programs, and we do that in limited ways, like in-house field trips, or bringing in the ballet or an orchestra, but someone who's going to instruct our students or be a part of the moral formation of our students. We want that to be parents, community members, our teachers, because they know what it looks like, and they know how to continue that process in our after-school programs as well.
All right, Ms. Uzma Cassie has asked a question: is the school a nut-free facility, or how does the school safeguard students with nut allergies?
Great question. So with severe allergies, what we've often done is, because we get their medical paperwork, and we make accommodations, a lot of physical accommodations, whether it be in a classroom or the lunchroom, to support students in getting the things that they need or not getting things they don't need, and being in a safe environment. So if there are particular severe allergies in a particular classroom, we'd say, like, this is a nut-free classroom. So snacks need to, not have those things in it. Oftentimes in the lunchroom, because we can't manage all the wide variety of what students bring, and even the hot lunch, we usually do an additional space for those students. So they're still with their classmates, but maybe they're at another table, or when they're outside, they're at a different picnic table, so that they can still be with their classmates, but be in a safer environment. Good.
All right, Jacob Weiss has asked a question regarding the administrative structure of the school. Mr. Weiss,
Yep.
Can you come off mute and ask your question?
I'm sorry, I should have changed that. My name is Christy, but thank you so much. I was wondering if you could please explain the administrative structure of the school. My familiarity is with the public school structure, so a principal, assistant principal, counselor. So how does that translate to Great Heart structure? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. It's the same. We just have fancy names for it. So I'm the principal. We call it headmaster, and we'll have an assistant headmaster over all of K-7. And then we're going to have 2 deans. And deans for our Arlington campus, because we have a little bit of middle school, we're going to have a dean over those older students, because it's very intentional about what we want that culture to look like, which is different from a kindergartner, and kind of spearheading that journey for those students as they go into high school. And then we'll have a lower school dean who, is much more knowledgeable with dealing with students in that area, with the curriculum and with the behavior of those students. So headmaster, assistant headmaster, lower school dean, middle school dean. Now, as we grow, as we add on 8th and 9th and 10th grade and add on our high school building, we're going to slightly separate our administrative teams. So the upper school will get its own headmaster, its own assistant headmaster. Even though we're going to be on one campus in one building, it just necessitates a couple more administrative people, and people much more specific to what that content in the high school looks like, and starting to develop students in more extracurriculars and sports and drama and fine arts and college, of course. So when we get to 9th grade, we'll have our own college counselor starting to work with the students all the way from middle school through 12th grade. Yeah, good question.
All right, if you have any other questions, please feel free to raise your hand or come off mute. I think I've answered mostly everyone's questions in the chat and the ones that Mr. Dunnick has answered for us. I've also put some links. Oh, I'm sorry. I've also put some links in the chat. Feel free to look at our website. We've worked hard to make sure there's lots of information there. Ms. Woodside, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a curiosity question. Have we filled 4th and 5th grade? Are we at capacity at Great Hearts Arlington?
Ms. Garther?
I can answer that question. I'll say we're about 3/4 there. I think I've got more 4th graders than 5th graders at the moment. We are about halfway enrolled, and we've got about 200 students in process, which means we've got 100, 200 more to go. So all that to say, we do have seats available in almost every grade. Kindergarten usually fills up the fastest, and that's true for our school. I think 3rd grade's getting pretty full as well, but there are seats available in the remaining grades. So feel free to share our Facebook post, tell your friends and family. We are having our park event this weekend. You're welcome to bring friends or anyone who'd like to know more about our school. We definitely are still recruiting students.
Great, thank you.
Okay,
Any
well,
other questions?
I would just go ahead, make sure I'm not on mute. Right. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and close this out. So I saw in the chat, we are looking to more events into June and July. We haven't scheduled those, but we will have more in-person events and open houses and hopefully some tours as we get closer to the school year. I just really appreciate you all being on here. This is going to be a fantastic resource to give to parents who weren't able to be on the call. So we're going to post this where they can hear some more curricular stuff from me, but from you. It's